In our last video, we covered the significantly huge news that Wizards of the Coast was going to be making some changes to the standard format. In addition to increasing the rotation from 2 years to 3 for new sets, they were also going to be developing a game plan going forward for how to best address standard, and that includes bans. We now have a bit of a better picture on how that's going to work, with the first ban list right around the corner. So that being said, let's jump into the video and talk about it. Thank you so much for checking out the video. If you do enjoy what I do here, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Click the bell icon if you want to stay notified, and let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of these changes, because they are definitely significant. And I will say, it seems like I picked a good time to get into standard, simply because there are a lot of changes coming that will ideally improve the health of the format. Now, Wizards has said that they want to do a lot of these changes because for too long people were kind of shying away from paper standard because your cards would lose value after being rotated. You basically have to buy all new stuff, so on and so forth. It's definitely one of the biggest criticisms of a rotation. One of the biggest benefits of a rotation, of course, is that things are always fresh and switched up, and certainly they can bring things back in and cycle things out. I've long argued that YuGiOh, which is essentially the biggest topic I've covered on this channel for quite some time, could potentially benefit from a rotation and may be a topic for a future video. But today we're going to talk about these standard changes that are coming. I'm going to try to break it down as effectively as I can here, and at Hipsters MTG on Twitter had a lot of this news. I'm not sure if this is a significant news source or not, but this news has kind of been followed up on by others, so we're using them because that's where I saw it first. Basically, what they're saying is there will be a yearly ban event for Standard every fall whenever the new fall set drops. If you guys are Yu-Gi-Oh players or familiar with Yu-Gi-Oh, you'll know that they usually have scheduled ban lists, or at least did for a long time, and now they're sort of like every 3 months-ish. But using it as a comparison is the closest thing I can look to say, okay, every fall when the new fall set drops, there are going to be updates to the ban list, with the intent being that it will keep the product a bit more fresh. They did state that there will also be, quote, extremely rare mini-ban windows 3 weeks after a new set is released, which I think would have to do with cards that are just way too powerful. One example that they had shown was Oko, of course, from Throne of Eldraine. Extremely powerful card, way too good, just poorly designed in general. And so basically they're addressing this type of thing as something for standard. Now, if you play other formats as well, they did state this fall ban announcement can impact other formats as well, but we don't really know what that means and whether or not there's still going to be changes to those other formats on a recurring basis or what, but that's really not the topic of the video today. We're mostly focusing on standard. I just wanted to acknowledge it. The news that shocked me the most here is that the first ban list is actually going to be getting to us on May 29th, which is about 2 weeks away from the date I'm recording this video. Now, that is a Monday, so of course it should be interesting to have plenty of content to cover in that week and see what types of changes that they make. But that's basically to sort of establish this going forward, and what they've stated is that they want to give cards coming out in Wilds of Eldraine a chance to compete and to be meta relevant, basically meaning they want to be able to sell product, they want players to be able to play with those things, and they said the set was not designed when this standard implementation had been put into place, so basically it's damage control, right? And they're going to be giving us a list, but let's talk about why that's actually kind of a good thing. Now, in the short amount of time I've been playing Standard, which has only been a couple of months, I have definitely noticed that there are some cards that absolutely dominate the meta. Now, power creep happens in games like this. It's not the most uncommon thing, and Magic Standard is certainly no exception. But the amount of diversity in the meta is definitely at an all-time low, with Rakdos midrange making up almost 40%, if not more, of meta-relevant decks, and that's not counting like spin-offs that use a lot of the same cards but incorporate other things like Atraxa. It is just a crazy dominant deck. It's not a tier 0 because there are other decks that can compete, but as a whole, it is definitely something that is in need of being checked. And so, while we don't know exactly what they're going to do, the thought line is that there might be multiple hits based on the way they worded stuff. And so whether that means multiple hits to Rakdos or multiple hits across different color combinations and different decks remains to be seen. I thought it'd be fun to just take a look at 5 cards I think you could potentially see list attention, whether they ban them or limit them. I don't know how often Wizards has done a lot of limiting in the past, and I'm not super well versed in older formats. I know that like Vintage and Legacy have cards that are restricted or at 1. You know, I do think there's a good place for that, especially as someone who came from Yu-Gi-Oh! But maybe, maybe they will, maybe they won't. I truthfully don't know whether or not there's just going to be straight up bans or limits, but we'll operate under the assumption that they're going to ban stuff. Now, the most common card that people want to see banned and are sort of expecting to get banned is Fable of the Mirror Breaker. We've covered this in a couple of videos, and it is an insane card that is probably one of the most single represented cards in the entire standard format. There are mono white decks that are playing Fable of the Mirror Breaker now simply because of how good it is, and splashing in cards like Itali in combination with a few dual lands, and still calling themselves mono white, but just trying to like shoehorn Fable into whatever they can. It gives you a lot of advantage for 3 mana. You get a body on board that creates treasure tokens, you get hand fixing, and you get an enchantment creature that can make copies of your creatures. With Rakdos and cards like Bloodtithe Harvester, that's just insane, but the card just gets better as time passes, and now that Kamigawa is not rotating out, Fable of the Mirror Breaker will continue to get better as more cards come out that can be utilized with it. I would feel pretty safe in saying that Fable of the Mirror Breaker is going to be banned. I don't know that for sure. Obviously, this is all speculation and fun, but I will say there are a lot of people starting to move theirs, trying to sell theirs sort of in anticipation of this. It is a really good card in other formats as well. I know Pioneer, it sees a significant amount of play, so that's not to say that there may not be some other changes to other formats, but Fable of the Mirror Breaker as a whole, I do think definitely needs to get that hit. Now, another option I've seen came up, and personally I despise this card, although I don't know how I feel about banning it, Invoked Despair. Another card that is really good in the Rakdos decks, but also just in mono black in general. It does a lot for 5 mana. It basically either gives you insane advantage while damaging your opponent, or it does both and forces them to sack off up to 3 things. You can completely have a game turn around just by having one Invoked Despair resolve against you, and it is not even fun to think about what happens once they're able to resolve multiple copies. I don't know that this one would be hit, but I do think it might be a nice way to kind of keep those things in check, and if they hit it in addition to Fable of the Mirror Breaker, I would be happy with that. It feels less likely, though, that Invoked Despair would be one to get list attention just looking at the power level of some of the other cards, but still, no tears, you know, no lost tears. Is that a thing? Is that even a sentence? I don't know. No lost tears here if that card were to go. Now, a card that's a bit more generically good, and honestly, I thought maybe was a bit slower and was looking towards rotating out, but has just continued to dominate in the meta, is Reckoner Bankbuster. This is, of course, a colorless artifact creature, so it can be splashed into anything. It gives you draw power. It ends up giving you a body on board that can crew it, as well as being a 4/4 that is just, you know, once you've gotten the draws out of it, you can basically utilize it in that fashion, and that's not taking into consideration cards that can blink it off the field and bring it back to give you consistent draw. Reckoner Bankbuster is really generic good and can be splashed into almost anything, and that may give it some type of hit just to reduce the consistency of some of these decks. I would be very surprised to see Reckoner Bankbuster hit on its own if nothing else was hit, but if they do decide to make multiple hits and hit Fable of the Mirror Breaker, I think Reckoner Bankbuster is definitely one that does a lot for very, very low risk, and that alone might draw the attention of those in charge of the ban list designs at Wizards. Now, another card I wanted to mention is Sheoldred the Apocalypse. If you've played Standard at all, you've probably seen this card. It is extremely powerful and super oppressive. The burn for basically 10% of your life every time you draw a card, and being a 4-drop 4/5 with Death Touch, meaning that that 4/5 toughness stat line makes it harder to out with certain cards. It is really, really powerful and is definitely one of the biggest threats that Standard has seen in a while. I don't know if they would go the direction of banning it outright, and that's because I'm used to that Yu-Gi-Oh mentality where, you know, if a card is still very much active, still something they can make money off of, and still product that they can push, are they going to want to hit it? I'm really not sure. We do know, of course, that Sheoldred's been printed twice. It was in Phyrexia All Be One as a concept creator, and then also in Dominaria United, and is kind of carrying that set for the most part. But again, this is, you know, my brain going to the Yu-Gi-Oh stuff and thinking like how Konami used to do it, and maybe Wizards won't do that, or maybe they will, and it's okay because, you know, Sheoldred's still going to have viability in other formats. I mean, it's dominating pretty much anywhere it sees play. It's that good of a card, right? So in Pioneer, in Standard, in Commander, it's just a really good card across those 3 formats at least. And I'm sure there's probably places in Modern that could splash it, although I don't know too much about that format. Sheoldred's definitely one that I would argue would benefit from being restricted if they were to do something like that, to say you can't play more than 1 copy. But like I said earlier, I just don't know whether or not that's something that they would do. And finally, one of the predictions, I think this is a bit more of a dark horse type prediction, but the Wandering Emperor, this is an insanely good planeswalker that is just one of the most powerful planeswalkers to hit standard for a while. At a 4-drop with Flash that can just activate its abilities during the opponent's turn is completely frustrating to deal with. It's really good in mono white, but it's also really good in, you know, the Esper Legends. Anything that basically has access to playing white can benefit from this, and it's just a really powerful card as a whole. I don't know that, like, that deck or those decks are really dominating the meta to the extent, but it's also easy to think that, like, if they're making this list and then not going to make another list for a while, this card could easily slot up into a lot more of a problem when some of the bigger threats are removed from the format. So maybe you do hit it, and maybe they do, you know, address that and sort of force people to pivot towards, you know, the Eternal Wanderer or some of the other planeswalkers that are, you know, out, although, you know, we don't have the biggest selection of them at the moment in the format. You know, there's still enough that you could find ways to make it work while lowering the sort of consistency of that. So those are 5 cards I think we could definitely see get list attention. I would bet a lot on Fable and Mirror Breaker getting hit, but of course, maybe it won't. Who knows? I just think it seems pretty likely, just based on comments I've read, things I've seen, and even some of Wizards' own responses to stuff. But let me know what you guys think. What do you think is going to get banned? Do you think there's cards I missed that you'd like to see get hit, or do you just hard disagree with me on some of these? Sound off in the comments down below, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.